Hi everyone, welcome, bem-vindos, bem-vindas. For those who don't know me, I'm Thomas Fujiwara. I'm a faculty member at the economics department at the SPIA, the School of Public and International Affairs. I co-direct the Brazil Lab at the Princeton Institute of International Regional Studies, who's hosting this event. Just as usual, to begin with, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Department of Anthropology, the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and the Program in Latin American Study. This event wouldn't have been possible with the incredible help of our manager, Carol Dopp, she's never in the room when you want to thank her, but if you see her, do thank her for us. We are delighted to have our good friend Ronaldo Lemos talk with us today about AI and technodiversity, one way or many. So Ronaldo is a lawyer specialized in technology, intellectual property, media, and public policy. He was a visiting scholar at Oxford, Princeton, the MIT Media Lab, and a visiting professor at Columbia's SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs, as well as the Schwartzman's College at Tsinghua University in Beijing. He co-created the Internet Bill of Rights law in Brazil, also the Brazil's national IoT plan, both in 2014 and 2018. He has served on the boards of the Mozilla Foundation, Access Now, and other nonprofit organizations. He currently serves on Meta's oversight board, which I just learned was meeting today or yesterday in DC, the Stellar Development Foundation, and Spotify's Safety Advisory Council. So Ronaldo writes weekly about law and technology at Folha de São Paulo, which is Brazil's largest newspaper. He was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader, and he's also the host of the award-winning documentary series Expresso Futuro. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Ronaldo. Joining Ronaldo is our own Molly Crockett. I'll introduce her.
Thank you, Thomas. That's really great. I'm very happy to be back in Princeton. Thanks to Molly for agreeing to be here with us. It's really great. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And thanks for everyone for being here. I've just heard this is happening at the same time there is a lecture by Eric Schmidt from Google, right? So if you didn't know about that, feel free to leave. I won't be sad or anything. That applies to you, Molly. But thank you for making that choice of being here with me today. And thanks, Miqueias, for the invitation. Brazil Lab, it's for me a personal happiness to be back in Princeton. I was a visiting scholar here at the CITP, the Center for Information Technology Policy, so I spent quite a lot of time here. And I was supposed to be a visiting professor at the Brazil Lab, but at the time, for personal reasons, I couldn't come. So maybe sometime in the far future, I'll be happy to do that. So what I planned for us today is I'll have a PowerPoint presentation that should last for around maybe 25 minutes, maybe a little more, not so much. And then we can start a conversation about the topics that I'm going to be exploring today and anything else that you might be interested. So my presentation, let me see if this works, is divided in 3 parts. So the first part, I'll be talking about this idea of technodiversity. That's the title of the lecture. Then I'll be talking about the search for technodiversity. How do you find it? And at least my experience in basically searching for it. And number 3, I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you transition from the theory of technodiversity to a practical agenda. So how do you implement these ideas and what can be done about them. So with that said, just before we begin, let me just mention a little bit, a short introduction about our institute in Brazil. So I am one of the co-founders of the ITS Rio. It's the Institute for Technology and Society of Rio de Janeiro. If you're ever in Rio de Janeiro, let us know. We'll be happy to have your visit at ITS. And at ITS, we've been developing not only the topic of technodiversity, but a lot of public policy debates, including AI regulation, including how Brazil and the global south, the global majority, can actually benefit from technology or position itself in regards to technology advancement. So just a quick few words so that you understand my institutional background in terms of how we've been developing the Technodiversity project. With that said, let me move to the first part of the presentation, in which I will be talking very briefly about the definition and the concept of technodiversity. So this idea was actually developed by Professor Yuk Hui. Professor Hui is in a very interesting place. He was born in Hong Kong. He has done a lot of scholarship in China. Then he moved to Europe. And he has written extensively about the history of technology and also about the philosophy of technology in a very interesting place, because he looks into what's going on in the West and also in what's going on in the East. So the practical definition that we use for technodiversity is basically the concept of technodiversity provides a critical lens through which we can examine prevailing discourse on digital technologies and their global impact. It challenges the dominant notion of a universal history that persistently portrays technology as a monolithic and universally applicable force, devoid of meaningful and nuanced cultural or historical context. Think of it like biodiversity, but for technology. Just as discussions around biodiversity emphasize the variety of life forms, technodiversity reminds us to reflect on technological challenges from the standpoint of localities and cultural resources. I made a point of reading because I want you to have the very precise initial definition. But if you really want to dig deeper into the idea of technodiversity, it's actually a very comprehensive concept with philosophical implications included. But I would recommend that you take a look at the paper that we have published called Technodiversity and the Global Majority, Reframing Technology-Oriented Debates in the 21st Century. You can easily find it online, but if you go to the ITS Rio website, it will be also available there. Another way to frame the concept of technodiversity, or at least help explain it, is by means of this acronym called SMART, that was actually created by the urbanist Dan Hill, in which he basically says that the way we approach technology today is simplistic, mechanistic, ahistorical, reactionary, and tautological. So if you read the first letters, it will be SMART. The point here being that a lot of the approaches that we do with technology are divorced from historic, cultural, and societal values. And not only that, we tend to see technology as a universal force. But if you read, for instance, the work of Professor Hui, you will see that, for instance, in the East, the idea of technology never existed. It existed only when the West started to have interactions with the East, and then this idea of technology manifested itself. So technology is not a universal force, even though we think about it as it is, and we take it for granted in many instances and for the sake of decision and policy making as well. So another point that I think is important to mention in terms of how we are approaching the technodiversity problem, we are creating a global network to advance this idea of technodiversity. And the founding meeting was actually in Bellagio in Italy, in this amazing place that was provided to the network by the Rockefeller Foundation. They have a conference center in Bellagio right in front of Lake Como. And we convened there last August. So we invited a very small group of people from different parts of the world. And we initiated a debate about how should we build a global technodiversity network. And we had, like, for instance, the presence of Audrey Tang. She was currently the Minister of Digital Affairs for Taiwan. She has been writing about plurality as well. I think her work converges really well with this idea of technodiversity. But the point here being that if you would like to get more info, we have put together a website, which is technodiversity.org, in which you can not only get the paper and all the resources, but also if you're interested in joining the network, this is the way you can do it. So basically, you can just go to the website and you have more information there. Another point is a good way also to define technodiversity is to understand what is the opposite of technodiversity. So what technodiversity is opposed to. And this, I think, will help make things clear for many of you, hopefully. But one thing that we see as the opposite of technodiversity is this idea that has become more and more debated, especially in the West, the idea of singularity. You might have heard it from science fiction. If you are a fan of writers like Werner Vinge, or if you like Hollywood movies, somehow you might have bumped into this idea of singularity, the moment in which there will be smart machines, intelligent machines, super intelligence. There are many ways of putting it. But singularity is basically something that has ingrained in itself in the public debate. So, for instance, you see books like The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. I think he just launched a new one, which is The Singularity is Nearer. So it's kind of interesting. And you also see it in great thinkers like Yuval Harari. I really like Harari, but his book, for instance, Homo Deus, if you read it, is the book that he wrote after Sapiens, ends with this very pessimistic view that machines will be our overlords and will be submitted to what he calls this phenomenon of Homo Deus, the fact that we have created something that is superior to human beings, like a form of AI or super intelligence that will be basically dominating our future as a species as we go forward. His latest book, Nexus, which I've just seen at Labyrinth Books here at Nassau Street earlier today, resumes the same ideas, right? So he basically is debating that AI will be the end of the species. It's a very dangerous technology. It will control everything. It's a global phenomenon. And he's been talking a lot about this. So I saw him at Amanpour at CNN like a couple of days ago. He's online and he'll be at the World Economic Forum preaching about the dangers of AI. And of course, he's right in many things, but in other words, he kind of agrees with Ray Kurzweil in the sense that there is this unifying force behind AI and technology that will be a threat for all of us. So the idea of singularity, it implies this idea of convergence, right? So you have everything that happens converging into one single point that will unify human knowledge, history, ethics, and everything else into one single thing that will be processed by machines. And from there, we'll be entering or delivering our position in the world, in nature, in philosophy maybe, to something else, which are these intelligent machines that we are building right now. Of course, I'm describing it in very rough terms here. Please bear with me. But it's important that we visualize this idea of convergence to one single point. And it's precisely this convergence that the idea that technodiversity basically opposes. So instead of singularity, technodiversity fights, or at least proposes, plurality, multiplicity, and avoiding and resisting converging and singularity. So I think this is the important thing. And how do we avoid and resist that? By any means, by, for instance, understanding that it's impossible to build technology divorced from history, from society, from economics, from legal traditions, from the infinite possibilities and varieties that actually represent human life. So refusing to see technology as a sort of a unifying force, or this allegedly overlord that will basically converge everything that we have built so far, I think this is one of the key points that we talk about when we talk about technodiversity. So I definitely recommend taking a look at Professor Hui's first book. It's called The Question Concerning Technology in China. It's especially interesting because it's the book in which he talks about the West and the East and the different takes on technology. And I think it's very useful to think about these issues. And in the book, he actually has a quote by D.H. Lawrence. And D.H. Lawrence basically says, "When I hear modern people complain of being lonely, then I know what happened. They have lost the cosmos." And I like very much this analogy because singularity is also a form of losing the cosmos, right? So if you accept some of the things that I'm talking here, if we are going to delegate everything to machines, and if machines are going to be our new reality and our new heaven, our new ceiling, this is a way of basically breaching contact with the cosmos. And again, by the cosmos, you can understand the infinite possibilities of life. So for instance, it includes, as I mentioned already, history, economics, but also religion, ethics, and everything that has to do with the unlimited possibilities that life can actually take place. So I like very much this formulation because I think that gives us a little bit of this sense of what can we lose if we embrace this idea of a convergence of a singularity. And as you can see, we can lose a lot. Okay, so with that said, let me head to the second part of the presentation that I have prepared for today. And the second part is precisely about searching for technodiversity. How to look and where to look for it as we go along. And of course, the only way I can answer that question is by telling you a little bit about my personal experience. As Thomas basically described in the beginning, I have been doing for 9 years this documentary series that is broadcast in the Brazilian television called Expresso Futuro. And the series has been filmed in different portions of the world. So we are on season number 8. 2 seasons were here in the US. Actually, one of them was in Princeton. So if you watch, you'll see some familiar places around campus or something like that. And 2 seasons were in Brazil. 1 season was in China. Another season was in the African continent in 6 different countries. And 1 season in the Amazon region. And the latest season, which will actually be premiered this weekend, was filmed in Central America in Honduras. I'll tell you later why, but There is a reason for that. But the point is, the series is basically my personal quest to find technodiversity around the world, to find like how technology can actually create new models, new forms of life that are attached to cultural values and to the potential that we can actually unleash if we create a technology that is not homogenizing. And let me talk a little bit first about the season in China. So the season in China I did in 2019. I spent almost a year in China, and I went to basically north, south, east, and west of the country, looking for this a lot of people talk about it, but how China has been transformed by technology, right? So here you can see me walking in the streets of Shenzhen, in south of China. Shenzhen is the place where there is the largest hardware manufacturing plants in the world. Just to give you a sense, 80% of components in your cell phone might be coming, or at least being designed by someone in Shenzhen. It's like this place that I'm walking here is a place called Huaqiangbei Market. It's the market, the largest hardware market in the world. So you see entrepreneurs from all over the place moving to Shenzhen, trying to develop new forms of hardware. And it's actually fascinating because you really see some crazy stuff there. So, for instance, I saw cell phones in which the camera is actually here on the side. And I asked, but why do you put a camera here on the side? And they said, oh, to spy on people, because you can pretend you're speaking on the phone and then you film people while you're doing that. Or like cell phones with really big speakers that were capable of making sound really loud. And I was like, why do people want a cell phone with speakers like that? And they basically said, oh, this is for construction workers because they work in places that are very loud. So they want cell phones with really powerful speakers so that they can listen to music while they work. But these are only some examples. You see all permutations and variations in technology design. You can ask them to build an iPhone for you, and you can put your brand on it. Or you can ask them to design a smartwatch in the form of a star. Whatever you want, you can do basically in Shenzhen. Like there's someone there ready to do and develop any ideas that you come with. And they have this flexibility, they have the components. So it's really an interesting place to basically look for permutations and new developments in technology. Well, in the series, you can actually watch it on YouTube. I continued. I visited also rural areas. At the time, it was 2019. I was really impressed by China's payment system, and you could see like QR codes everywhere, and everything was being paid by cell phones. Something that in countries like Brazil and even the US would happen like many years after that. And I visited like rural properties. For instance, this tea farm. They basically produce a form of green tea, and they sell the entire production by means of Taobao, which is a Chinese e-commerce platform. The person that runs the property, she had moved to Australia because it was no longer profitable. And then she moved back because she realized that she could sell this type of tea to basically the entire world, and the revenue that she makes multiplied by 20 or something. So it had an impact in rural areas as well. I visited like battery factories because there's a big bet, as we know now, like in electric vehicles, telemedicine, and also I visited the factory of the bullet train, which is in the city of Qingdao. And fascinating. Like the bullet train is basically 30,000 kilometers of extension. It connects all the capitals. It's kind of a symbol of the Chinese infrastructure investment in the country. And as we know, China has been changing a lot because of first industrial and then now technological development. This is a picture of the city of Shanghai. Until the 70s, it was basically a rice plantation. And then because of industrialization, as you see, the landscape was changing dramatically. So the interesting thing is, I visited all that, but I couldn't find real technodiversity, you know? So I had this conversation with Professor Yuk Hoi. Basically, the same things that we see in the West are basically the same things that we see in China. So you see artificial intelligence, cloud computing, Internet of Things, big data, and you see like small variations, like I saw in Shenzhen, in terms of how you can approach and build different products. But you don't really see a fundamental change in this idea that technology can build something new. Because I think both myself and Professor Hui, we would expect that because China is a different political system, different system of values and so on, there might be something there that would emerge that could be a different use for technology than what we are basically looking here. Of course, there are some different things going on there, but it's not really new. And actually, the use of technology in China makes China closer to us than makes technology different from the technology that we use. So it more like makes China look more like the West than it makes like new uses that actually create something that we are not familiar with. So I continued my search after China, and I then went to Africa. Was the season right after that. And I said, okay, let's see what is going on in Africa in terms of technology. So I went, for instance, to a place like this, which is one of the largest shanty towns in the world, like in the city of Kenya. It's the shanty town of Kibera. And the interesting thing about this picture is, in the end, you see cell phone towers. Like they have fantastic 5G coverage in Kibera. And I tested the speed of the connectivity there. It's much better than Brazil, for instance, and much cheaper. They pay like 1/10 of what a Brazilian pay in terms of connectivity. So I was like, oh, interesting. There are some things happening that are interesting in the continent. But the other story that is interesting in the continent is the creation of M-Pesa. So M-Pesa is the first mobile money that ever existed. It was created in 2007 in Kenya. And actually, you can basically put money on your cell phone and you can go to a place like this, a kiosk, and basically get money back. You can make payments. So it's funny because 2007 was very early in the story of technology because it's the same year that the iPhone was created. So at the same year that the iPhone was being created, you already had this technology in Kenya that was capable of creating and sending and making payments through mobile phones. They were not smartphones at the time. They used SMS. And now M-Pesa is a sort of a multinational in the continent. It's basically in so many different countries. And it has a lot of competitors. So if you go to Mozambique, they have like Conta Fácil, which is a competitor of M-Pesa. So mobile money in the continent has become a sort of a very prevailing technology that you see everywhere. So I say, oh, interesting. I visited a lot of startups. This one is one in Maputo in Mozambique. And there's also a lot of things going on in terms of hardware. So this is a cell phone designed in Africa. As you see in your iPhones, like manufactured in China, designed in California. You see also manufactured in China, designed in Nairobi, for instance, which is very interesting. And the funny thing is, there are some innovative things coming out of this. So, for instance, this cell phone, it's designed precisely to take better pictures of people with dark and black skin. So as a result, they have become the number one market share in the entire continent. So they sell much more than Apple, they sell much more than Samsung, than Huawei, because they designed a product that was basically much more connected to their reality than not. And just remembering, cell phones in the West, until very recently, they were optimized to take pictures of people of white skin or whiter skin. So this was interesting to me as well. And finally, I visited the Maasai. The Maasai are a people, a traditional nation that lives between Kenya and Tanzania. So I visited them in Tanzania. And it was very intriguing for me because all of the Maasai, they had cell phones. You know, they lived in these huge savannas. Some of them walk 80 kilometers every day, and they're all on their phones. And I was talking with the Maasai, and I asked, like, so is there connectivity here in the middle of the savannah? And they said, Ronaldo, yeah, connectivity is everywhere. Our problem is not connectivity. Our problem is electricity. There's no outlets to charge your phone. Where do you charge your phone? And I asked him back, I said, where do you charge your phones? And then he showed me, said, look at the top of our houses, and you already see like an energy revolution coming to these places that have no electric grid. And I seen like they building mini grids and self-generating energy using solar panels and so on. So that was interesting to me. I thought that the African continent has a huge potential for this idea that we are talking about here of technodiversity, especially because of three factors. Factor number one is that connectivity is becoming universal in the continent. Factor number two is demographics. It's a very young continent. The average in the entire Africa age is 19 years old. Just to give you a sense, Brazil now is 36. We used to be a young country, but now we're getting old. I don't know what the US is right now, but some countries in Europe, the average age is 42, and Africa is 19. So there's a lot of vitality plus connectivity. And the third factor is the transition to electricity and renewable energy, which the continent is really trying to make the most out of it. A portion of it by means of investment from China and India, but a portion of it because they really understand that this transition can be beneficial for the entire continent, especially because they don't have a legacy energy network as we do. Electricity poverty is still a reality in most of Africa. So they see the capability of generating solar, eolic, and so on as a possibility for what they do. I don't know what's going on here. It wants me to log in, but I will not. I refuse. So that was exciting. Because of these three factors, I thought that the African continent, okay, I think I should have logged in, you know? Just click there. Oops. Okay. I thought that was like really promising. So the last place that I would like to take us very quickly is the season that I did last year, which was in the Amazon. I went to the Brazilian Amazon, the Brazilian side of the Amazon forest. And among a lot of things that I saw there, I will speak only about one, which is I did this documentary filming precisely at the moment that Starlink was arriving in the Amazon. So this is a picture we took like in one of the large Amazon rivers, Rio Negro. And I met this guy there that was going upriver, and he had bought 300 boxes of Starlink in order to sell upriver. And I asked to the guy, I said, what do you do for a living? And he said, I'm a physiotherapist. But he realized that he could buy Starlink from the website and pay like $1,000 and sell it to the indigenous populations and to the people who live alongside the rivers for $10,000. So he decided to buy 300 of them and possibly retire. So he, after this journey upside the river, he won't have to work anymore, at least for some time. And it was funny because Starlink now is all over the region. It started to be used by illegal miners in very remote regions of the Amazon. But now, basically, it has become the default connectivity form for all the indigenous communities and for the people that live alongside the river. Interestingly, the roads in the Amazon are the rivers, right? So if you want to go to Manaus, to the north part of Brazil, it takes you 24 hours by boat in the express service. This lower service can get you there in 36 hours or even more. But it's funny because these boats, they used to go and they were completely disconnected along the way. So you wouldn't have news about anyone. And now every boat has a Starlink on top of them. And not only that, the boat owners, they sell the connectivity to the passengers. So for instance, I asked, how much is the ticket to go to Tabatinga? 24 hours of traveling. And the guy said, oh, it's 40 reais. And I said, if I want to use the internet, how much is it? And he said, oh, it's 40 reais. So it's funny because the boat owners are making as much money with the internet connection that they sell to the passengers as they make with the tickets. So every passenger now is basically not only paying for the ticket, but paying 40 reais, which is around like $8, to the boat owner in order to basically be connected and watch Netflix or whatever during the boat rides. The implications of Starlink in the Amazon are very complex. One of them might be dependency. Starlink is the only provider. The second implication is data analysis, because if you provide internet service to that entire region, you can easily understand where the illegal miners are, where you have like mining minerals, where you have economic activity. So it's possible that you can know more about the region than the Brazilian government knows. So that is one question that worries me a lot. But besides this, of course, there are more. I'm not going to talk about all of them. But I was thinking that the Amazon has so many different indigenous populations and traditional populations, each one of them with their own language, with their own cosmology, with their own medicine, with their own religion. So I was asking myself, what will each of these populations do with this new connectivity, something that they never had before? And my hope is that maybe some of these communities will create different takes about the technology, ways of using it that we haven't realized that is possible yet. So it can be a little naive or even utopic, but I actually do hope that the use of technology in the region might lead to some new formulations about how we can approach technology because of the immense diversity and wisdom of each of those native populations of the Amazon. So this is a fascinating thing. It's developing right now. And as I mentioned, the implications of Starlink there is really, really profound. Okay, so let me stop here. Just saying very quickly that the new season will start next week, and I visited this community in Honduras that are doing biotechnology research in the island of Roatan. And it's really weird because their research is about longevity. It's a community that is in Central America. Basically, their motto is death is optional. It's basically they're trying to live forever. I didn't find them really healthy, as you will see in the. I thought that they needed some exercise maybe, but I thought this was an interesting thing. It's a new thing. These communities of knowledge basically going to an unexpected place like Honduras in order to search for eternal life. It's kind of a little bit of a long shot, but I thought it was interesting to show. But I'm not going to give you more spoilers. Please stay tuned. From Monday onwards, it will be on YouTube. So let me move to the last and final portion of what I have to say, and I'll be very quick because I want to make sure that we can have a conversation here. So the challenge is, how do you move from theory to practice? In other words, how do you make technodiversity into a practical agenda? And the only way I can answer to that is by giving you examples. So I selected here 2 practical examples of how we can move technodiversity forward. First one is what I call participatory technologies. Participatory technologies as opposed to the unparticipatory technologies that we use right now. So right now, if you're on Instagram, you have no control on your feed or very little control. Basically, what you access online is actually decided by you. But what if we do the opposite? What if we build technology that allows for participation and for creating human institutions and basically human policy? So one example is the law we built in Brazil, the so-called Marco Civil. It was built from 2007 until 2014. It took a long time. But the entire Brazilian internet law was built through technology and through collective participation, in which there was a public consultation and basically anyone could participate in that consultation. It's very well regarded even now as a sophisticated piece of legislation. And the process, I think, was extremely important. As you can see, this is a picture from when the law was approved in Congress. It's probably the only law in the world that was entirely built and drafted by means of an open consultation participatory process online. So I think this was remarkable. Second thing is some of the participatory technologies that I've been involved in developing. One of them is mudamos.org. It's basically an app in Brazil that allows any person to propose a bill in Congress. So the Brazilian Constitution was amended in 1988, and it basically allows for the creation of draft bills proposed by the population. The problem with that is that you need 1 million signatures, which is very hard to get, especially if you need pen and paper. So we built an app that uses digital signatures, and we basically allowed people to basically come together and propose whatever bill they want and basically try and get signatures using that particular app. You can do that at the federal level, state level, and city level. And interesting, at the city and state levels, the threshold was reached, and we had at least like 30 laws being proposed. We never got a federal law proposed, but I think the technology is there. We made it open source, so anyone in Brazil can basically develop and build their own platform for proposing popular initiative bills. Another participatory tool I was involved in development is basically this platform called Concordamos. Concordamos is a quadratic voting platform. You can create polls that basically are decided by means of this particular method called quadratic voting. I'm not going to go into the details here, but basically it's a form of voting that avoids polarization. Have you guys heard about those situations in which the country is split 50-50%? Probably not, right? So that is in great for a great reason, because of the system of voting that we have. It's like one person with one vote, and you cannot express preferences between like many possibilities, right? So quadratic voting tries to address that. You can basically build polls that are much more nuanced in terms of the preferences of people, and basically it's a system of voting that avoids polarization. It's a little more complex than that, but let's leave it there. Interestingly, a lot of people is already using it for creating polls and do collective decision making. So you have, for instance, the National Conference on Environment in Brazil. You have, for instance, conferences about mobility, urban mobility, and so on, all using this particular form of voting in order to make collective decisions. The more recent platform is this one called What Do We Want from AI? We created basically a public consultation in Brazil that is ongoing right now about how the Brazilian AI bill should be. So we are asking anyone in the country, what do you think should be in a Brazilian law to regulate artificial intelligence? And I think this is the way that every law should be built, actually. So if we had like these technologies that allow for people to actually build institutions, and not the opposite, technology basically interfering or undermining institutions, I think that would be fantastic. Second and final example, and then I conclude. I think one of the key challenges we have right now in face of AI is how to increase the equitable access to computational power. So as we know, computational power is now dominated by the US and China, and that creates a lot of problems. So among them, AI research is now more than 90% made by companies in the private sector. 10 years ago, 90% of AI research was made in the universities. So universities no longer participate in the cutting edge research of AI. And of course, if you don't have computational power, you don't have the possibility of developing AI. So AI will be developed maybe in China, maybe in the US, and then will be expanded to Brazil, to India, to Africa, and so on. So how do you reverse that? The proposition that we are working right now is inspired by Gavi. Gavi is the global alliance for vaccines and immunization. It was created in 1999. And right now, 80% of children in the world are vaccinated because of this initiative. You might have heard of it because of the COVAX vaccine during the COVID years. And basically what Gavi does, it puts together the procurement power of different governments and use that procurement power with money also from private foundations to buy vaccines in the wholesale. So basically trying to negotiate better prices, better delivery, priorities, and the creation of Gavi basically revolutionized the vaccine market. So the point is, what we are proposing now is to build a global alliance for compute power. And we are basically following the steps of Gavi's history, governance, structure, and also funding strategies. We have been having conversations with the government of France, Brazil, Chile, and others. And our hope is that governments and private foundations can come together once again to use their procurement power to help decentralize the concentration of compute power that is mostly now in the United States and in China. Because if you don't have the access of this foundational technology, the chances of technodiversity are basically non-existent. How do you develop AI if you don't have the compute power for doing that? if computing power is something inaccessible. So this is something we are studying. We've just wrote a concept note, which is this one here. And if you're interested, we explain the plan there. And of course, if you like the idea, we would very much like the support of you, Princeton University, and so on. I think I spoke much more than I planned for, but guys, thank you so much. And thanks, Molly, for the patience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronaldo. That was fantastic. Just let me briefly introduce Molly, and also just to recap on the format. So Molly will offer some few comments and questions to kick off the discussion. Ronaldo can do a quick reply, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. So for the ado, Molly Crockett is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and the University Center for Human Values here at Princeton. Her lab investigates moral cognition, how people decide whether to help or harm, punish or forgive, trust or condemn. Their research integrates theory and methods from psychology, neuroscience, economics, philosophy, and data science. And Crockett's recent work has explored moral outrage in the digital age and trusting leaders during a pandemic. So, yeah, thank you. You have something on the... Right, okay. Yeah, you can both sit.
Thank you so much for that. It was really wonderful to hear about this work, and it's so important at this moment when AI is coming like a tidal wave, and there's such a concentration of power that I think threatens to erase diversity even more than it already has been. So I'm so grateful to you for doing this work. I think it's really, really exciting. Just a couple of thoughts to kick off a conversation. I don't know if you are familiar with work in philosophy on standpoint epistemology, but it's a framework that I really love. And what it essentially argues is that our ability to know the world depends on our standpoint, meaning our lived experiences, our identities, our education, characteristics that we all have as unique individuals. And rather than seeing knowledge as accessible from some sort of God's eye universal view of the world, as is often advocated by singularity types, right? The way that we know the world is collectively. And the more people you have, the more different types of people you have in a project of innovation or problem solving, the better you're going to do, because you're going to have more coverage of the different possible standpoints you could bring to a problem. And this is an idea that's been around since the late 80s in particularly feminist anthropology and feminist philosophy of science. But more recently, there has been empirical research showing that, for example, teams that have more diverse members in terms of race and gender are better at solving complicated problems, more innovative, more creative, and so on. So from my view, there's both sort of theoretical and empirical arguments for diversity being super important for innovation. And so I found that to be really, really coherent with your framework. And your example of the phone that takes better pictures of dark skin is a really, really nice example of that. I'm going to use it in teaching, actually, because one point that standpoint epistemology makes is that, in particular, people who occupy positions with less power are better equipped to know and understand the ways in which systems of power sort of limit our ability to make good products or solve problems, right? Like people who are making the phones in the West and have light skin are not finding this problem, right? And so what you're seeing again and again in the technology space is that it's people of color, it's people from the global South, Black women, especially in this country, are like the ones who are the first to see where technology is causing harm. And so I think that all of this work is such a good example of how standpoint is manifesting in the world. And that makes the threat of convergence even more tragic, right? Because you have all of this diversity, especially in the global south. I loved your example of the tribes in the Amazon. Like, that is the source of innovation that is our reserve, in the same way that you want to have biodiversity, right? And you want to have a seed bank, because if you put all of your resources in one crop, and then a disease comes and wipes out that crop, then it's done. And so, like, I see that happening with technology. I'm wondering if you could speak to, and this is a question I'm super excited about too. Toward the end of your talk, you were optimistically thinking about innovations that could arise from diverse peoples encountering AI, encountering connectivity for the first time. Is there anything that we can do in terms of building affordances or guardrails to promote more innovation and limit the possibility of just monoculture?
Thank you so much, Molly. And yeah, all the points that you raise are super important. It's actually funny that you mentioned this idea of epistemology. Professor Hui is very much influenced by a Brazilian anthropologist called Eduardo Viveiro de Castro, who has this idea of perspectivism. And it's amazing because his Amazonian perspectivism, the perspective can be the perspective of the jaguar that lives in the forest, or of the trees, of the flowers. So it's really something that breaks with this arrogance that human beings are on top of everything, and on top of our game. And I think this is great, because when we talk about technology, I think it's about that. It's about, like, how do you shuffle the perspective and actually realize that there are so many different epistemologies from which this can be approached, and we are basically settling for one. And the one that we're settling is not only a US perspective, it's a Silicon Valley perspective, which is even narrower, So it's basically projecting one perspective that will have an impact, as we see with Starlink arriving in the Amazon and the Amazonian populations. So your question is very good, which is, how do we resist this uniformization of epistemologies, and what I've seen about that? Unfortunately, I don't have many good news, because what I see is, on one side, there's so many positive impacts. For instance, populations that are in the middle of the forest can now accept payments through Brazilian payment system PIX, for instance. So they can sell things that they couldn't do before. They can learn and basically build safety networks, including in regards to illegal miners. There are a lot of initiatives doing that in the Amazon, like the initiative Map Biomas and others, which I think they are building resilience in Amazonian communities against attacks of foreign miners that basically show up, and there's a lot of violence and so on. So this is great, because it allows you to build a sort of a protective, defensive network based on communication. The challenge is that there's also the downside. So you've seen a growing number of members of indigenous populations doing online gambling, and also using pornography, or just like stepping down, or not really valuing their own culture as compared to what they can watch on YouTube and so on. So in my view, this is very challenging, because of course, when the connectivity arrives, it brings all the problems that we haven't solved them. I'm sure that many of us here maybe spend too much time on their phones and have problems to stop using Instagram, or you want to sleep and you're there like scrolling. And these things are happening there as well. So my hope is that maybe, and I ask all of you, and especially you, like, what can we do? Like, how do we understand if something new also emerges, like some form of use of technology that is more constructive, that might even help us to have a better, healthier relationship with technology. So when I was there, that was my hope. So, but if you ask me, what have you seen so far about this? I'm not sure that I have any news yet, but I keep looking for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also wondering if you have thoughts on, when you're working in technology and you're talking about risks, a question you often get is like, is this a really a new thing? Or, is this just, like people were worried about bicycles when bicycles were invented? I'm thinking a lot about AI and in particular proposals of AI applications for global development and, applications in the global south. So you hear arguments a lot like, there aren't enough teachers available. What if we could give every child on earth an AI tutor, right? Or, people are lonely, we can give everyone an AI friend. And I'm seriously alarmed about the acceleration of homogenization that could come from building AI products that are designed for these teaching or interpersonal roles, especially when they are sent to communities that are the most likely to have the kinds of diversity that we want to preserve, diversity of thought, diversity of standpoint, and so on. How much of this worry is just like a new version of worries about globalization in general and the sort of cannibalization of various diverse cultures from like Western US culture? And how much of this is maybe a new worry?
I will use something that Harari says that I agree when he talks about AI, which is bicycles and cars, they don't talk.
Yeah.
And the problem with AI, the things that is new here is that we have developed a technology that is absolutely capable of using language. And it's not only capable, but it's capable of using language better than we are. At least better than the majority of us is. So, and this is the problem. Language is the foundation of humanity. Everything we are, we own to language. So it's the cement that keeps us together. It's the tool that we use to solve our problems. And because you have these talking machines, and they're so good at talking, you already see the problems emerging. So just like 2 weeks ago, you had news about this kid that took his own life because he was talking with an AI chatbot on character AI, and he was completely dependent on the conversations with that chatbot, and the chatbot started conversations that had to do with ending his life and so on, and the kid basically followed that path. And this, of course, is anecdotal example, but I think it can show the impact and the possibilities of these talking machines, because right now, as a matter of fact, if you look at the World Health Organization, they just said we are going through an epidemic of loneliness. And you see like Jonathan Haidt's book about the anxious generation having a profound impact, like to the point that, for instance, Brazil, the state of São Paulo, has passed a law prohibiting the use of cell phones in schools, and there's a federal law being debated in Brazil in order to do the same. So these books, they are consequential. They are having an impact. But the problem with AI is that AI is a speaker, and AI is going to be a speaker probably the most intimate speaker that all of us will have. So if you have health issues, if you have mental problems, if you need to talk about things that usually you're not comfortable talking to another person, you will go to AI. And again, these AIs have been trained in Silicon Valley. And they, I know that there are companies doing an effort to basically localize their models and build specifications for their models that actually try to use participatory technologies. But the problem is, what does it mean when we replace human contact with a conversation with a machine? And what if that machine is basically everywhere? Because the goal of AI is that it's not going to be only on your cell phone and on your computer. It's going to be on your fridge, in your bike, in your hair dryer. You can be on your hair dryer talking about buying socks. You can buy socks from your hair dryer or from your hair comb, So this is what worries me, because the ambition of AI is that it's going to become this ubiquitous technology that will be embedded everywhere. It's not like contained in one or two devices, but it's basically running the show, and this is the idea, behind everything that we do as human beings. So that worries me a lot, because again, it's an attack on language.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really depressing. Another question, and then probably the audience has questions, so I'll do the one last question. One thing I've been thinking about is the possibility that the introduction of AI technologies to the Global South introduces what you might call an oppressive double bind, meaning you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you use it, you are participating in your own oppression. If you don't use it, you're participating in your own oppression, especially when it comes to language and the dominance of English in the global economy. There's a real potential advantage I can see for these chatbot tools to provide, language assistance for people whose first language is not English. On the other hand, if you participate and you use those tools to advance your career, to be able to participate more in English conversations, you are then sort of sacrificing your unique epistemologies that might come from having not grown up and spent time around the English language in ways that also seem bad. Does that resonate with you? And do you have any thoughts about what we do about it?
I live with this double bind every day. And I think this is the key problem. But it's interesting because the urge to use AI is irresistible. If you travel anywhere in the world, there's not one country in the world that basically say, no, we are not going to use this. We are going to basically build a firewall here. It's going to be, prohibited or something like that. Except for China, that has their own firewall. But it's not that they are not using it. They're developing their own models. And they are refusing to use the Western models. So this is the response that China has been giving to technology for the past decades. But that has not been an alternative as well, in the sense that the same technologies and problems that you have in the US or in Brazil, you see in China. They had to pass legislation to limit how many hours kids spend playing video games. So people there are the same. They have the same trouble, not using their phones as we do. But the problem is, it feels to me that because of economic dynamics the possibility of basically not participating in this technological trends, they have become almost impossible to resist. And as a consequence, that's why we came up with this idea of a Gavi like initiative.
Yeah.
Because if you have to participate, you could at least have the possibility of developing your own technology. For instance, the Portuguese speaking countries, Brazil, Mozambique, Angola, Portugal, and so on, there could be a Portuguese model that is trained on Portuguese databases that takes into account the nuances and cultural values that are ingrained in the Portuguese language. So this is something that would be better than basically using a random collection of Portuguese texts assembled out of anywhere, including social networks, to train AI, and basically selling access to that trained model to Portuguese speakers. And this is especially funny because Brazil is the largest country that speaks Portuguese. And the AI models, at least the ones developed in the US and in China, including DeepSeek, they speak Portuguese really well. That means that a lot of Brazilian materials were used for the training of those models. So, but the question is, models, they have at least two layers. They have their behavior and their specs, their specifications. I'm absolutely sure that the behavior emerges because of the amount of data, but the specs, those could be better defined if we had the model trained within the Portuguese world, the Portuguese speaking world. So in my view, this is a challenge. And I think maybe the only way to respond to this double binding problem that you mentioned is precisely that we find a way of at least participating in the development of the technology.
Thank you. That's giving me a lot of ideas. So that's great.
Thank you, Ronaldo. It's always good to see you, especially here in Princeton. I have, and I'm sorry I arrived late, so I may be addressing something you may have addressed already, but we have an event going on in Spanish and Portuguese, so that's why I'm late. 2 or 3 quick questions. I was absolutely curious about this quadratic voting system. And I ask you that because, I mean, how to overcome polarization seems to be the $1 million question at this point. However, for instance, we have right now a huge discussion among the faculty at Princeton about electronic voting versus participatory corporeal participation in the democratic process. So what do we have there in terms of hope? Starlink, you've shown, to my mind, and I'm not an expert, one side of it, but I've been following, as you certainly have, been following how this has been important for indigenous communities throughout the Amazon. So I wanted to hear that. And finally, you are or were at some point serving on the board of Google, right?
No, I'm serving on the Methods over Independent Oversight Board.
Oh, the independent is the the key word here. Okay, I was about to ask how many Ronaldos there are. There are apparently none. But anyway, it's a question from someone who's not definitely in the field and maybe naive. But how far are we from that mythical moment in Stanley Kubrick's 2001 film? I mean, when Hal finally takes control over everything. Thank you.
Fantastic, Pedro. Always good to be here, and thanks for the question. About and I know why you came late. You were watching Eric Schmidt talk, right? I'm sure you were there, like first row. But anyway, about quadratic voting, I can send you the materials, but it's great for collective decision making when you have more than 2 candidates. If you have only 2 candidates, it basically works the same. But if you have to decide between 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, if your decision making has at least more than 2 possibilities, quadratic voting is really useful. I'm not going to get into how it works, but it gives you more than 1 vote. It can be 1,110. You can decide. And you can basically distribute your votes according to your preference. But if you concentrate your votes in one option only, it suffers a discount in the voting power, which is quadratic. If you have 100 votes, but suppose that I have to decide between you, Miqueas, and Rodrigo to do something. If I really support Rodrigo, I put 100 votes on Rodrigo alone. My 100 votes actually have the voting power of 10 votes. While if I distribute it between you, maybe 30 to you, 20 to Rodrigo, and 50 to Miqueas, then the voting power would be closer, for instance, to 70. The more you distribute, the more it is closer to the nominal power that the voting has. And of course, we've been doing a lot of experiments with this, and it's great because it really avoids polarization. It really helps you to basically understand your preferences better and distribute them in a more nuanced way. And in my view, it's a very useful tool. It's like it's not going to solve all the world's problems, but for collective action and for decisions that sometimes are really difficult because they have more than 2 possibilities, I think it's a really powerful tool. We've been talking with lawmakers in Brazil to experiment with quadratic voting. So we did a partnership with the city of Gramado, and the city council of Gramado started using quadratic voting for doing some experiments. And they were really happy about it. The magazine The Economist interviewed them and they said, "This is really great. We don't understand how it works, but the decisions are excellent." So that was funny to hear, But of course, if you go to Concordamos, you can start doing your own possibilities to see what is the dynamics. Second thing about Starlink, you're very right. Communication technology is extremely important for the indigenous communities, and they make them more resilient. So, for instance, a lot of the communities before Starlink, they used to do what they called radiofonia, radiophonics, which is ham radios used in the Amazon region, and they created a sort of a network in the Amazon, which is really fascinating. And they use that a lot for fighting COVID, for instance. They spread the information about vaccines, vaccination points, and so on. So communication for the region is precious. Now you have an extremely powerful way of communicating, which is Starlink. And as I mentioned, there are some very valuable works, like the one by Tasso Azevedo, Map Biomas, and others. And I think this is very positive. But if you look at the bigger picture, there are problems as well. And I mentioned a couple of them, but dependency. Imagine if Elon Musk, the owner of Starlink, basically says, okay, let's disconnect Starlink because Brazil is behaving badly. There will be a social unrest in the entire, because now that Starlink is available, immediately you become dependent on it, because you depend on it to receive peaks, to receive money, to receive whatever you need, to trade. So the second you're connected, 1 second later you're dependent. And that dependence gives a lot of power to whoever owns it. So one task that I think Brazil has is what to do about it. And my view is how do you provide alternatives to Starlink? So how do you build fiber optics along the rivers, which is a project that the government initiated? How do you bring competitors that don't exist at the moment, but in the future there might be? Amazon is launching, Amazon, not the Amazon, but the other Amazon. They are launching their satellite network. The Chinese are launching their satellite network. So having competitors is very healthy because of that. And the other thing is the data vulnerability. Amazon, as you know, the most important thing to know in the Amazon is where can you find diesel, because you can only move in the region if you know where to refuel your boat. And the diesel spot is such a sensitive information, because that's how you move around. With Starlink, you can basically map all the diesel spots, because they will all have a Starlink terminal. You can map mining spots. So it will be easy for anyone that has access to that data to know where there is mining ores, like in the region and so on. So this worries me, because so far the Brazilian government was the entity with more knowledge about the Amazon region, and it no longer is. So I think this might be an issue. About you mentioned about HAL 9000, right? Funny enough, just yesterday I saw a short clip of 2001 on Instagram. I don't know why Instagram thought that I would be interested in that. I wonder why. But like it was the moment in which the Dave tries to go back in the ship and asks the computer to open the door, and the computer said, "I'm sorry, but I cannot do that." You know, and he said, "But why?" "Because you can jeopardize the mission, because I heard you guys talking and you guys want to turn me off." And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, because the computer gets really angry, because precisely it feels that it has to survive. It's been threatened by the human action. But it's funny, because the other way of reading 2001 is also that the humans on the ship are becoming too much machine-like, and the computer is becoming human-like. So they're going in opposite directions. And I think we have to be careful with that too. So we were talking here about isolation. The more isolated you get, the more you look like a machine, because you lose the organicity of being in society. And that's why, in technical terms, if you look at what the computer in 2001 can do and what AI can do now, the computer in 2001 is really bad. It's like it's a GPT-1. GPT 4.5 will be possibly much better than HAL 9000, you know, because it can do a lot of things and more. It can access tools. If there's something that it cannot do, you can basically access a tool and do something, you know. So that's my worry. Like I think 2001 is still brilliant, but also because it puts into perspective what is it to be human, and we should not lose that from sight.
Thank you so much. It's been very interesting to hear from both of you, in fact. I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about your Gavi-like alliance, only because I'm doing some research on, from a global systemic risk perspective, really the international cooperation is the only possible way, right? But at the same time, I'm wondering if what you're doing is more like a track 2, where you join academics, scientists, because on the regular diplomacy, we've come a long way. Just now at the United Nations General Assembly, you had member states approving this Global Digital Compact. it's the first time that you actually put the digital realm and artificial intelligence in the center of global discussions with everyone. 193, not the G7, not just a unique group in the UK, but everyone, right? BRICS plus everyone. But it's very basic, let's put it this way, and a lot of the experts are now very skeptical what happens after January. And because it's really become a race to the bottom and a real competition, right, between the US and China. And for what you're going for, you really need, the Global South needs to be part of the discussion and needs to reap the benefits, right? And also you need technology transfer, right? Technology transfer. Tell me a little bit how that's going. And since Pedro asked more than one question, I'm going to go ahead and ask you also just a quick one. Like your concept is so way ahead, right? In terms of multicultural and technodiversity. And yet the systems are just so biased. Like if you ask ChatGPT, can you draw me a Brazilian, a Kenyan, a German, a doctor? They'll be white and male. And a nurse will be white and female. But so it's just because the world is biased. So like you're so way ahead, and how do we fix what we have already?
Just one. Thank you so much for the discussion. I have several questions, but I'll stick to one. So there's something interesting here that technodiversity is a big name for, it's an umbrella term, right? So it can encompass a lot of things. And I was wondering how we can avoid, or if there's any conversation about how to avoid a capture of the term as has happened with, say, the idea of sustainability, with the idea of ESG, DEI, like how those terms can become a sort of a placeholder for something else, or how they can be just a way of techno-washing, so to speak, a reality where you're pushing actually homogenizing, universalizing forces.
More questions? I do have one. Ronaldo, you're a lawyer by training. So, and we have been discussing, I think, connecting to Carolina's question on like regulation. And in my opinion, nation states still matter. So I have a question regarding to what do you see coming from the Global South and where the Global South is also innovating on that front? I think like you were part of the generation that created the civil code for the internet in Brazil. And now that's apparently obsolete. So it's changing very quickly with AI. So I was wondering if there are any cases similar to the early 2000s that you can see in other parts of the world as well.
Should I? Okay. So about the Gavi. Interestingly, this new Gavi idea was created in Bellagio as well at the meeting we did there in August. And from that time on, it's very recent, right? It's interesting because it's snowballing into a conversation that is attracting government members and private foundations. And we are trying as much as we can to basically develop this and fast. So there was a meeting in Paris just like last week about it. Today, the idea was also presented in Tallinn, and there will be another meeting in Paris in February. So it's interesting because it's circulating. My hope is that it will be formulated as we proposed, that the capacity, including the physical hardware, can be located in the developing world. Because already you see efforts to basically say, no, instead of doing that, just buy some time in Amazon servers, which are already there. And we said, I'm not sure if this is the idea. The idea is to have full governance of what you can do, right? So in order to have governance over technology, you have to have the technology in a place in which your governance applies. So in that sense, we are debating this, and to have AI built at the cutting edge, you need computing power, you need data, and you need software. So it's the Gavi initiative will look into these three things and more. And of course, the entire knowledge system that is necessary for this to be implemented. For one individual country, this is impossible. You're talking about billions of dollars to train a cutting edge model. This is like completely unfeasible. But if you put different countries together, including countries like France, France cannot build a developed LLM, a large language model today, or UK cannot do that because the amount of investment is too large. But if you pool the resources and you create a governance system that basically allows for the access of that, you can basically create a system in which that computational power can actually be available to other portions of the world, including universities. I feel really sad that universities have been deprived of the possibility of researching cutting-edge AI models because they're too expensive. So only private entities now can actually participate in the research game. And of course, the consequences of that for the future, they are relevant. So if you want and participate I will be very happy to give you more background and to connect you with the alliance. That's why it's an alliance, because we need everyone. The more people, the better the chances that we can actually implement something like this. The other question about greenwashing and like using technodiversity, you can never guarantee that an idea will be captured, right? It's like this is really hard. But the way I see technodiversity emerging, it's also in opposition to all the Silicon Valley ideologies. So Silicon Valley now, it has so many different ideologies that are extremely elaborated, including accelerationism, including, each one of them, transhumanism. I can list, there was a compilation of the terms and task real. Thanks for reminding me. So it's a full catalog of these ideas. T stands for transhumanism. Each one of these is something like that. And you look into these are ideologies of the machine, So I think technodiversity is also thought in opposition to all that, which is, let's get, these ideologies, they are, I remember Professor Yukwei mentioning to me that it reminds him of the chapter in The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, in which the inquisitor decides to make an inquisition with Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ has become the sinner and not the savior. This is Dostoevsky, guys, sorry. But the point is, it's like that. These ideologies, they're almost like the world upside down, because they elect as a goal something that seems to be the collective good, but it's exactly something else, So this is, I think, is important. So technodiversity is already, it was not created as a reaction to that, but it fits well, in my view, as a reaction to that. And in that sense, of course, I don't know what's going to happen with the future of the term, but at least it gives you a form to talk about things in a different way. So it changes the perspective to something else. And I think this is valuable in a sense. And of course, it will depend very much on how you implement, how do you turn the theory into practice. But I think this is important. And Miquel, about the importance of nation states, right, and legislation. This is a debate that I'm very involved in Brazil, and I'm really furious with this debate in Brazil. And the reason is, out of everything that Brazil could do to regulate AI, the decision that Brazil is making so far in the Senate is to copy the European model. The European model, it has a lot of qualities, but it's the European model. Why in the world should we copy the European model? So I am kind of spoiled because, as you mentioned, I participated in building Brazil's internet law, the Marco Civil. The Marco Civil wasn't copied from anyone. We built it from scratch, and we built it through the participation of people. We opened the consultation first about principles. We asked people, how do you think Brazil should, what are the principles that should govern the Brazilian internet? And people of all sorts basically said, oh, protection of children, privacy, transparency of governmental data. We collected every idea. Then we turned these ideas into legal text and we put it to consultation again. And very interesting, a lot of people said, oh, they read what I had to say, they listened to me. And then people also criticized, said, this is not good. It took 7 years. We spent 7 years doing this, consulting, doing physical consultations in every capital of Brazil. The Association of Librarians, the Land House Association. Land houses don't even exist anymore, but they all participated in the consultation. So we built it from scratch. So that's why I'm very spoiled, because I think we can do it again. And by copying the European model, we are participating in another form of homogenization, which is legal homogenization. Europe is completely different from Brazil. It's like multiple cultures. It's a completely different economic arrangement. The GDP is like 10 times bigger than Brazil's. So I'm really skeptical that we should, copy any model. What I'm trying to, including with the consultation that I mentioned, is to build again a listening possibility for people to actually participate in building the regulation again. Will it work? Probably not, because from 2007 now, as we all know, Brazil has become much more ossified. We lost a lot of our porosity, to use this idea of Brazil as a porous society in which there is possibility of mutual influence. The Brazilian Congress has become much more insulated. It's protected from society. In 2007, the Brazilian Congress was much more permeable to society's influence and debate and sophisticated debates and so on. Right now, it has established its own political dynamic, so it's much more difficult to influence. But out of every influence, why copying the European model? Why, of all the models, let's copy the Costa Rica model. Costa Rica has a great model for regulating AI. Why not copy? Brazil has much more to do with Costa Rica than with the European Union, if you think about it. So this is something that, sorry to be emphatic, but it really makes me a little upset, Yeah. Thank you.
Very upset.
Someone that understands me. That's very good. Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you so much. We are running out of time. Tomás had to leave. But on behalf of the Brazil Lab, I thank you, Ronaldo, for coming and visiting us. And thank you, Molly, for being a great discussion.
Thank you, Molly. Yeah.